Hey guys, welcome back here to today's edition of Intuitive Angling, and appreciate you guys swinging by the channel and hanging out with me a little bit. And guys, believe it or not, I got thinking about this, and I think that I am partially responsible for live scope being used in bass fishing tournaments today. Something happened, actually two things happened. One thing happened in 1994, and another thing happened in 2004. And I think those two events that I'm going to tell you about in today's video are responsible for me, I don't know, maybe the technology that we see in fishing right now. So I want to get in today's video and explain to you what I mean by that. I think you guys are going to find this video really interesting, and looking forward to getting your comments on that as well. Also, guys, for get started, thank you very much for everybody who's taken time to hit that subscribe button here at Intuitive Angling. If you haven't done it, man, that's a great free way to support the channel. We also got channel memberships. We got channel memberships. We got Patreon memberships. We got all the links that I have in my video description. If you guys like the content here and want to support the channel, those are all good ways to do it. So a big thank you from me and my family here for everybody who's been helping the channel out. We really appreciate that. Okay, guys, you're going to find this hard to believe, but at one point, I was one of the leading tech guys in professional fishing, one of the leading cutting edge dudes for technology in bass fishing. I know that's probably hard for people to believe, but I'm going to explain to you guys what I mean by that in today's video, and really what changed my stance on it, what made me completely do, a 180 from the way I used to be. Okay, like a lot of people, like when you're young, I mean, I got started in this really young. I wanted to be a professional fisherman forever, and I read everything that I could back in the 70s and early 80s. And as with youth and being full of the vigor of the life and pumped full of testosterone, you want to learn as much as you can. Your mind's a sponge, and you want to get good. And one of the things that I always did, my whole growing up and development as an angler, is I wanted to stay up with the latest trends, the newest and best. If anything came out, I worked my butt off to try to get it. I wanted to keep up with it. I mean, I went to all the ICAST shows and all the sport shows trying to keep up with the latest technology. Okay, so the first thing that happened that, started all this is back in, I guess it was 1994, myself and Gary Klein, I'm pretty sure, and this I'm not 100% sure because I don't know everybody what they were doing at the time, but as far as I can tell and as far as what I know, Gary Klein and myself were the first two professional anglers ever to use GPS in a boat. This was 1994, I believe it was. Yeah, 1994. We'd been reading on these GPS units that people use for hiking and stuff like that, so they wouldn't get lost. And these GPS units back then, the only thing they had, nobody used them in fishing. It wasn't even a thing in fishing. Everybody just used maps, like paper maps and triangulated and all that type of stuff. But these GPS units, they were about that big, and they looked like a flip phone. They were little bitty, and they had a screen about that big on it. The screen was probably, I don't know, at the most 2 inches by 2 inches. That was the GPS screen, is 2 inch by 2 inch. So anyway, Gary and I got a couple of these. We had a tournament, I think it was up at Lakes, I can't remember which one it was, St. Clair or something like that. But anyway, we got a couple of these GPSs, and nobody ever heard of them, a fisherman using them ever before. And this particular GPS unit, all it was a screen with a little arrow on it. And there wasn't any maps at all. It was like, all it had was just a blank screen, and it's like the arrow was where you were at. And as you were moving across the screen, the arrow would move across the screen, but there was nothing on the screen. So what we did in this particular tournament, the first tournament that I know of anyone ever using GPS, we went out in the lake there and we found some offshore structures, way out off in the lake, just graphing around, finding them with our paper map. And we marked the GPS waypoint with our little tiny GPSs. And in the tournament was able to run, it showed a straight line. What it did is it had a mark, you put a waypoint down, and then you had your little boat. It wasn't a boat, I can't, it was just a little arrow. And you went in a straight line to that spot. And that's how we were able to figure out, how to get to offshore locations. So as far as I know, Gary and I were the first two anglers that did that. We took them and we took duct tape and we duct taped them on our thighs. So when we were running down the lake, the little GPS was duct taped right on our thighs there, and you could look down and see it while we were running the boat. And at the same time, I had a paper map on the other part of my lap there, and my compass up front. So that was the introduction to the first, GPS usage ever in tournament fishing. It's Gary Klein and myself. Okay, now the second thing that happened was 2004, and this is the thing that I sort of feel ushered in the acceptance of this technology that eventually led to live scope being in tournaments, was another part I played in. In 2004, I was one of the very first anglers out there to have this prototype side imaging technology. It was 2004. I had a Humminbird unit. It's been so long ago I can't even remember the name of the unit, but it was the first side imaging technology ever. Nobody had it. I didn't know anyone had it, but I was on the Humminbird staff at the time, and I got a chance to use these prototype models. And the first tournament I ever fished on them was at Lake Wheeler in Alabama. Nobody had side imaging. Nobody. I was the only boat in professional fishing that had side imaging at that time. So I remember I got out there with it, and I didn't know much about it. I'd read, I read all the manuals and everything, and tried to, figure out as good as I could. But nobody had even heard of it, and I didn't tell anybody. I had just got this unit right before the tournament. So anyway, I read up on it as much as I can, and I went out there on the Decatur Flats, and I turned the side imaging unit on the Decatur Flats on Lake Wheeler. So guys, if you've never been to Lake Wheeler before, the Decatur Flats are these vast flats that are off the main river channel, and there's a lot of like stumps on it, and lay down logs, and little ditches and depressions and that type of stuff. But there's a lot of wood there. There's a lot of stumps and wood. And I was idling across the flat there at Lake Wheeler on Decatur Flat, and all of a sudden I could see these logs and these laydowns 50 feet out away from the boat on the side imaging. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like unbelievable. And I'm like all excited and all pumped up about it. Nobody had that. And I wound up doing good in the tournament by casting to those logs that I found on my side imaging. Everybody else was just blind casting. Nobody knew they were out there. But I could go on those big vast flats, and I could fan cast all those areas and catch them. And I wound up doing really good in the tournament doing it. Actually, I had 2 good tournaments with it. But anyway, so here again, I'm leading the edge. There's 2 technological advancements: the GPS and the side imaging. That I'm the first dude that ever used them things. So I'm like thinking I'm like the tech guru. I'm like the leader of it at this point. And then after this went on, I had it about 6 months, I guess, and I've been using it quite a bit in my tournaments. And something clicked in me. I was out on the lake one day, and something clicked in my mind, and it's like, and I got thinking about it. I got thinking about, the GPS, and I got thinking about the side imaging and where it's leading to from there, and something just clicked in my mind. I said, this isn't right. This is not a direction we want to go in. And you gotta understand, guys, I was somebody that's been in sport for 30 years at that time. And again, I was Mr. Tech. Believe it or not, I was Mr. Tech in the fishing industry as far as the cutting edge on the thing. And I had this epiphany about 6 months later. I said, this is not what fishing is. And I got thinking about what is gonna come after that. Okay, we have this side imaging technology. Where is it gonna be down the road? And I started to get more turned off about it. And I remember, right after that, about 6 months after that, Aaron Martins had got one, my buddy Aaron Martins, and him and I were fishing together at Grand Lake. And I had been using mine quite a bit, but I've been incorporating it with my shallow water pitching and flipping, over those 6 months. But Aaron was fascinated by this thing. And we were at Grand Lake, and he'd been messing with it for a couple weeks before we fished together. And he took me out in the back of this one cove that I'd fished ever since I was a kid, and he started marking these brush piles and these little bitty, pieces of wood in the water, something like that. And he basically told me, he said, this is the way I'm going to start fishing from now on, and he went around that day and he marked, with his GPS and with the side imaging, he marked like 100 little stumps and little underwater objects with that side imaging. And he was all pumped about it, and he was telling me this is the way I need to fish. And at that point, something had already clicked in me, like before I fished with Aaron. And I just said, dude, I said, Aaron, I can't fish like this. I said, I have tried to do this and I've had success with it, but I just don't like it. I don't like what it's about. I don't like what it's doing to the sport. And at that point, guys, in 2000, this was like the fall of 2004, something like that. Like the fall of 2004, I sort of had this, I made this commitment that I was not going to do this anymore. I wasn't going to chase technology. I wasn't going to allow it to influence how I fished because I didn't feel it was right. I did not feel it was a legitimate way to catch fish. I thought it was taking something away from the sport. As much as I love the sport, I'm very protective of it. And since I was the leader and the innovator of all this tech, you know, I just came to that realization before anyone else that I knew what was coming with this. And then we started seeing, if you notice right after that, this side imaging technologies took off and they started making improvements of it. And then through about the next 2 or 3 years, you know, it dominated a lot of the tournaments, not to the extent that forward facing does, but there was a handful of anglers like Brian Thrift and some guys like that won a lot of tournaments just using side imaging. It was sort of like the way forward facing sonar was the first couple years it came out. Remember when Jason Christie won some tournament up at St. Clair using forward facing sonar? There was a few dudes using it, but not very many. That's the way it was back then. But after that, but basically, guys, after 2004, I went the other direction completely, and I just have been a very big advocate for how big of a destructive force that technology is in our sport. Because I can tell you right now, guys, as somebody who was on the cutting edge of GPS and who was on the cutting edge of side imaging technology, it hasn't brought anything in our sport that has benefited it. In fact, it's went backwards. I can honestly say to you guys, and a lot of you guys don't know because you were in grade school or in diapers back when I was doing this, I can honestly say that the sport of bass fishing, whether it be recreational or professional, was 1,000 times better prior to 1994 with that advent of the GPS. The GPS, side imaging technology, down imaging technology, forward-facing sonar technology, all the advancements in mapping systems and all that type of stuff, it has brought nothing into the sport that improves it on a pure fundamental level. It has only taken away from that. It's taken away that wonderment and the unknown and that magic and the mystery that I always talk about. And, you know, not knowing what's there, not knowing what's around the corner. And we lose everything that's precious about the sport. And that's why I jumped the fence on technology, even though I was leading the charge at one point on it. So anyway, guys, I just wanted to share that story with y'all. I hope it helps you get to a better understanding of where I'm at now. I think a lot of people can relate to what I just said there. But as somebody that has not always been anti-tech like I am right now, I've just shifted my stance completely on it. So I'm not like this somebody that has never been on the other side. I've been on the other side probably more than 90% of the people ever will, just back in my day. But it's deteriorated our sport, I can tell you that. It's taken it away. It's robbed so much of the value of the sport. It's taken away so much of the magic of the sport, and it will continue to do so unless everybody can sort of have that epiphany that I did back in 2004. So anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in. We'll talk later.